This story is about a young girl called Jessica and the time she went to the cafe to meet her friends. It was a beautiful summer's day and the sun was hot on her skin. Jessica waited for an hour, but her friends didn't arrive at the cafe. She tried to call them, but they didn't answer their phone. At 5 p.m., Jessica went home again and did her homework for school the next day. The homework was too hard and she felt sad because she couldn't do it. Then her brother James came home and asked her what was wrong. Jessica told him. He asked to see her homework. "Oh, that's easy," he said. Jessica asked him to show her how to do it, but he said no. Jessica offered him some money, but he still said no. Then she offered him some candy, and he smiled and showed her how it was done. The end. Sand at the beach, sand at the shore, sand in the ocean, on the ocean floor, sand in the desert, sand on the ground, sand in a sandstorm, blowing all around, sand from rock that has crumbled into grains, sand in a sand dune, shaped by winds and rain, sand on an island, sand in the sea, sand in a sandbox, all full of cat pee. A village is like a very small town in the countryside. In the UK, there are many villages and towns and just a few cities. Villages can be just a few houses or as many as 2,000. In the UK, some are very nice and the price of land is even more than in the cities. Many famous English people have houses in the village. George Harrison, who was one of the Beatles, had a luxury mansion in Oxfordshire. Another more recent singer, Ed Sheeran, is from a small village in Suffolk, England, close to where Mr. Paul comes from. People who live in a village are usually friendlier than people from the big cities. They like to spend time talking with neighbours and help people do things around their home. The main problem with living in a village is that it is far away from the city, and so shopping is more difficult. Hanoi is located in northern region of Vietnam. It is about 90 kilometers or 56 miles away from the coastal area. Hanoi contains 3 basic kinds of land and is 5 to 20 meters above sea level. The hills and mountainous zones are located in the northern and western part of the city. The highest peak is at Ba Vi and is 1,281 meters high. Barry lives in a small village just outside Hanoi. He loves his house and taking care of his garden. One day, Barry went out to cut some wood for his fire. He looked around his garden, but could see no trees that would be good for firewood. He walked to the end of the garden, then down to the side, but he found nothing. Then Barry noticed a small chair under a little tree. "I don't use that chair to sit on, so I'll cut it up for firewood instead." He thought, just as he was about to cut the small chair, it spoke to him. "Please do not hurt me. I'm not really a chair, but I'm a beautiful princess." Barry looked at the chair and thought of the cold night ahead. Then the chair spoke again. "If you let me live, I will marry you," said the chair. Barry scratched his head. If I had a wife, she would cut the firewood, he thought. The next day, Barry went back into his garden looking for wood. As he approached the little tree, he saw the chair was gone. In its place stood a large cupboard. That will keep my fire hot for days, he thought. Then the cupboard spoke. Please do not hurt me. I am the Queen of Hanoi. Barry scratched his head and didn't know what to do. He went inside and went to bed. Then on Friday he returned to the garden looking for wood. He walked up and down and left and right. Then he walked near the little tree again. The cupboard was gone, and in its place was a grand piano. Quickly he took out his mobile phone and called the music shop. They paid him $1,000 for the piano. Barry bought lots of wood with the money and married the lady from the music shop. The end. Father's Day. Most countries in the world celebrate Father's Day. It is a day where we give thanks to all of the wonderful things our fathers do. From helping us learn how to ride a bike, to when we fall and they pick us up. Help with our homework and help with repairing our broken things. Even when we have our first fight, they help us feel stronger and more confident in facing our fears. Thanks, Dad. In the winter it's every kid's dream, as snowflakes begin to appear, that suddenly there'll be a blizzard, and they'll cancel school for the year. Though most kids are willing to settle, and I am inclined to agree, they could merely close school for one day. One day off would be just fine with me. A day free from all forms of homework. A day without science or math. When you leave all your school books at home and run out of the door with a laugh. City: London, Seoul, Madrid, Washington, D.C., Hanoi, Bangkok, Canberra, Brussels, Berlin, Rome, Ottawa, Havana, Copenhagen, Cairo, Athens, Reykjavik, Dublin, Tokyo, Kingston, Taipei, Moscow, Manila, Wellington, Oslo. Names: Jason, Mary, Simon, Joyce, Douglas, Susan, Lisa, Wayne, Jonathan, Bob, Kevin, Sally, Megan, Sean, Holly, Stephanie, Joe, Stephen, Tony, Chuck, Beth, Peter, Chip, Sandy, Donnie, Fran, Pauline, Paris, Nellie, David, Stuart, Richard, Andrew, Eric, Charles, Bert, Daniel, Ed, Paul, Colin, Ian, Polly, Stu. Pizza toppings: Hawaiian, pepperoni, mushroom, cheese, chicken, corn, meatball, vegetable, ham and pineapple, chili beef, anchovy, cheese and tomato, meatball, spicy chicken, sausage and onion. Harling is a young girl who goes to school in Hanoi. She loves her school because it is the best in Hanoi, but sometimes her friends don't like her very much. One day she brought a giant bag of candy to school, but wouldn't share with anyone. Her friends kept saying, "Harling, you will get fat or lose your teeth if you eat all of those." But she didn't care. Another day she took her pet spider to school and scared all of her friends and made them cry. Sometimes Harling can be very nice. She gave all of her friends some homemade cakes that she had bought especially for her friends. Most of them got sick afterwards, but that was just coincidence. Or was it? Another time she invited everyone to the cinema, but unfortunately she could not go because she was sick. Wait, that was the same day that Tom Cruise came to Hanoi, and she came to school with a selfie of them both. Come to think of it, Harling is never very nice, and always horrible to her friends. I don't think I will be friends with her any more. School starts in a week, and today is the day we go shopping for school supplies. I told Mum that I didn't need anything. I loved my backpack from last year. It had a picture of Topaz, my favourite rock singer. It even had her autograph across the bottom of her picture. I couldn't wait to get it out and check my supplies. When I pulled out my backpack from the back of my closet, I was horrified at how dirty it was. Somehow, over the summer, the strap was broken, the colour was faded, and the zipper was stuck. There was a dark spot right on Topaz's chin, and you could hardly read her signature any more. When I looked inside, I found papers that were stuck together from an open glue bottle. I wondered who took the cap off my glue. There was a library book I borrowed and forgot to return. My markers had escaped from the box and the caps were mysteriously missing. My lucky pencil was too short to write with any more. I discovered the dark spot that was on Topaz's chin was from a cupcake that I had packed away from the end of the year picnic. The frosting melted all over my notebooks and scissors. I decided it was time to make my list for new school supplies. Daffy lives in a large pond in Hanoi. The water is warm and the weather is usually hot. The only thing that Daffy doesn't like is the Vietnamese people love to eat duck. They have tried many ways of catching him. Sometimes they stop their car and say, "Get in, I will take you to see my puppy." Others invite him to dinner, but he always knows it is a trap when they keep licking their lips while talking to him. One even asked him how much he weighed, and then started looking at large cooking pots. Then one day he fell in love with a beautiful Vietnamese girl, and it was love at first sight. They ate bread at the bakery, and she paid the bill. They drank milk at Highland's Coffee, and she paid the bill again. Daffy was so happy. The next day was the same. She brought him bread and milk. Each day she brought him the same, and then at the end of the week she asked him to go home for dinner. Unfortunately, he was the dinner, and was never seen or heard of again. The end. This story is about a little puppy called Brian. He is a Chihuahua and is supposed to be very brave. But Brian is actually very scared of everything. One day Brian went out for a walk. It was a beautiful day and he walked very far away from his home. As he walked, he looked at everything: trees, flowers, and many beautiful things. Then he saw a butterfly and chased it around and around until he was dizzy. When he stopped, he looked around and saw that he was standing on the edge of an old tree branch which had fallen into the lake. "How did I get up here?" he said. He looked around, but there was no way down. Brian called out, "Help me! Help me!" but no one heard his cries. Brian was scared and very hungry. He started to cry and wished that he had never left his home. Then there was a voice from behind him. "Hello," said the voice. Brian looked around and saw a beautiful parrot. The parrot asked Brian if he needed help, and Brian said, "Yes, please." The parrot picked him up by his collar and flew down with him to the ground. Brian said thank you to the parrot before running home. The next day, Brian returned and took the bird some fruit as a thank you for saving him. The end. It was Saturday, and Mindy was getting ready for her birthday party. In just 3 hours, all of her friends would arrive with presents and excitement. Every year, Mindy and her mum made a cinnamon cake, fresh on the day of her birthday party, and Mindy thought this year would be no different. Excited, she waited for her mum in the kitchen. Mindy's mother came into the kitchen and took her apron from the hook on the wall. Instead of putting it on, she lifted it over Mindy's head. Surprised, Mindy stood as her mum tied the strings on the apron behind her. "Mindy, I think you're old enough to mix the batter yourself this year. I'm sure you can do it. Remember what we say. Yes, baking is just a little sugar and a little spice." "That's right," said Mindy's mum. "Now go ahead and start. I'm going to go blow up the balloons." With that, she left Mindy alone in the kitchen. Maybe her mum was right. Maybe there wasn't much to it. Carefully, Mindy measured out the ingredients and poured them into a big bowl. Carefully, she mixed the batter until it was perfectly smooth. Carefully, she poured the batter into the cake pan. Then she called her mum. "It's ready to go into the oven," Mindy said. Her mum turned on the oven, set the temperature, and popped the pan into the oven. Mindy had actually done it. When the cake came out, though, something seemed wrong. Mindy tried to poke it with a toothpick, just as her mother always did. The toothpick wouldn't go through. The cake was almost as hard as rock. "I did exactly what I was supposed to do," Mindy moaned. "I was so careful. I didn't put the eggs in until last, and I measured the baking soda exactly." "Baking soda? Oh dear, that's the problem. You were supposed to use baking powder." Mindy began to cry. "I'm sorry, Mum. I tried so hard." Mindy's mum gave her a big hug. "I'm the one who's sorry. I expected too much and I was hard on you. I guess you could say I used too little sugar and too much spice." Mindy laughed and her mum laughed too. "Now let's try again," said Mindy's mum. "This time we'll do it together." One day there was a king. The king had a problem. He got stuck on the opposite side of the lake and couldn't get back to his castle on the other side. He stood looking at his castle and thought and thought. "I could build a boat and sail across," thought the little king. "But I don't know how," he realized. "I could swim across," he said out loud. Then he remembered he couldn't swim. The king just didn't know what to do. Then he remembered that he was the king. "Send the royal helicopter," he said to his servant over the phone. A few minutes later, the helicopter arrived and flew the king back to his castle. Once upon a time, there was a farmer who had two sons. When they were old enough to marry, he told them, "You must each cut down a tree, walk in the direction it points, and you will meet your beloved." The older brother knew whom he wanted to marry, so he made sure the tree fell in the direction of her cottage. Miko, the younger brother, did not have his skill. The tree pointed into the forest. Miko walked through the forest until he found a cottage. He went inside, but the cottage was empty. "I'll never find my beloved," he complained. "Don't be so sure," said a small voice. Miko looked around and saw a mouse. "You're only a mouse. How can you be my beloved?" Miko asked. "Once you get to know me, you might like me," the mouse replied. Miko stayed and talked with the mouse. She was kind and smart, and Miko liked her very much. Then Miko got home. The farmer had more to tell his sons. "Your brides must weave a cloth for me. If it is good, you may be married," he said. Miko went back to tell the mouse the news. "You cannot weave. You are only a mouse," Miko said sadly. "All will be well," said the mouse. Miko sat down and soon fell asleep. The mouse called over to her mouse and her rat friends. Together they wove a cloth which they had folded into a nutshell. When Miko woke, the mouse gave him the shell, and he carried it home to his father. When his father opened the shell, everyone watched in amazement as he pulled out yard after yard of fabric. "Your beloved is a great weaver," exclaimed his father. The next day, Miko returned to visit the mouse. "Is today the day we marry?" she asked. "Yes, it is, little mouse," said Miko. "Though I am worried. What will my family think when I bring home a mouse to be my bride?" The mouse thought and then said, "All will be well." Then she whistled and a tiny carriage made of nutshell pulled up to the cottage. It was pulled by rats instead of horses, and driven by a mouse with another mouse footman behind. Miko's bride climbed into her carriage, and he followed. As the little carriage pulled up to Miko's house, everyone stared. Miko had bought a mouse for his bride. "This won't do," said Miko's brother, and he kicked the carriage into the river. "What have you done?" cried Miko. "You killed my beloved. You may think she was only a mouse, but I loved her." He began to cry, but then his father gasped in amazement. "Look," he said, pointing to the river. Out climbed 2 men, 4 horses, and 1 wet but beautiful princess. "A witch had put a spell on me, and turned me into a mouse," said the princess. "She said the spell could only be broken by one brother who loved me and another who hated me. I did not think it would ever happen, but now it has." So the 2 brothers were married, and both were happy. When Miko returned to his bride's cottage, he found it had turned into a beautiful castle. There they lived happily ever after. The UK has 4 parts. 1 is Scotland, 2 is Northern Ireland, 3 is Wales, and the largest part, number 4, is England. The weather in Scotland is much colder than in England, because Scotland is in the north of the UK, and as you go further north, the temperature becomes cooler. Northern Ireland is also cooler, and can be quite wet from rainfall. Wales has more rainfall than other parts of the UK, but has a warmer temperature. Finally, England has the warmest temperature and less rainfall, although it does still rain quite often. The bee. Bees live in a house that is called a hive. There are 3 kinds of bees: workers, drones, and queens. Only one queen bee can live in each hive. If she is lost or dead, the other bees will stop their work. Bees are very wise and busy little creatures. They all join together and build cells of wax for their honey. Each bee takes its proper place and does its own work. Some go out and gather honey from the flowers. Others stay home and work inside the hive. The cells that they build are all of one shape and size, and no room is left between them. The cells are not round, they have 6 sides. Did you ever look into a glass hive and see the bees while they work? It is pleasant to see how busy they always are. But the drones do not work. Before winter comes, all the drones are driven from the hive, so they don't eat the honey that they did not gather. It is not safe for children to handle bees. Bees have a painful sting that they use in their defense. A shoemaker and his wife lived in a little house on the edge of the woods. They were very, very poor, and each day they grew poorer and poorer. At last there was nothing left in the house but leather for 1 pair of shoes. "I will cut out this last pair of shoes," the shoemaker said to his wife. "Tomorrow I will sew them and peg them." So he cut out the leather and left it on the bench. The next morning he went into the shop to make the shoes. What did he see? A pair of shoes, all nicely made and ready to be sold. The stitches were so neat, and the shoes so well made, that they were quickly sold. With the money, the poor shoemaker bought leather for 2 pairs of shoes. Then he said to his wife, "I will cut out the leather for 2 pairs of shoes. Tomorrow I will sew them and peg them." So he cut out the leather for 2 shoes and left it on the bench. The next morning, when he went into his shop to make the shoes, what did he find? Yes, there were 2 pairs of shoes already made. The work was so well done that those shoes were also sold very quickly. With the money, the poor shoemaker bought enough leather for 4 pairs of shoes. Those he also cut out and left upon his bench. The next morning he found 4 pairs of beautiful shoes, all well made, and so it went on. Instead of being very poor, the shoemaker, he became very rich shoemaker. His shoes were so well made that even the Queen herself wore them. Mr. Paul loves sports and adventure. One day he went to the north of Vietnam and hired a boat for the day. He went out as far as he could away from all of the other people and then stopped the boat. He took out his camera and took a selfie. "Cheese!" he said happily. Then he realized that one of his paddles had fallen into the water and floated away. "Oh no! How will I get back to shore now?" he said miserably. Hours went by and no one came near him. He shouted and screamed and yelled, but it was no good. He sat down and felt very sad. Then he saw a boat full of beautiful girls approaching, and he stood up. "Hey, girls, can you help me?" he asked in a manly voice. The girls just giggled and kept going. "Hey, come back! I'm in trouble!" But they just ignored him. Another 4 hours, and then he heard another boat. "Hello, can you help me?" he called out. It was a beautiful girl, and she had a huge smile on her face. "Sure, get into my boat and I will take you back to shore," she said in a friendly voice. Mr. Paul was saved, and they soon fell in love and got married.